Imagine waking up in a small village of maybe 200 people. No police station, no courthouse, no locked doors down the street where the bad people go. Somebody just stole your food supply for the winter. You know exactly who did it. Everyone does. There's no investigation to run, no evidence to gather, no trial to wait weeks for. The question isn't who. The question is what happens now. Because there is no building to put him in, no guards to watch him, no system waiting in the wings to handle this for you. Whatever happens next, happens today. And it happens in front of everyone. So what do? Most people assume punishment has always looked roughly the same. A crime happens, someone gets locked up. Time passes, they're released, or they're not. But that's not what happened for most of human history. Prisons, as we understand them, buildings specifically designed to hold people for months or years as the punishment itself, are almost embarrassingly recent. We're talking about the last 200 years, give or take. Out of roughly 10,000 years of settled human civilization, the prison cell is a newcomer, a stranger who showed up late to the party. So here's the real mystery. For thousands of years across nearly every culture on Earth, humans faced the exact same problem we face today. Someone hurts someone else, someone steals, someone kills, and they had none of our tools. No holding cells, no forensic evidence, no case files, no probation officers. And yet, societies didn't collapse into chaos. People still lived together, traded together, raised children together. Something was working. What was it? At first, this seems like it should be simple. Just punish the person, hurt them back, take something from them, until you realize the deeper problem hiding underneath. Here's what almost nobody thinks about. Punishment without prisons isn't just a different method. It's a completely different logic. Think about what a prison actually does today. It removes a person from society. It separates the punishment from the community. You don't have to watch it happen. You don't have to participate. The state does it for you, quietly, somewhere else. Now take that away. If there's no separate system to absorb the violence of justice, where does that violence go? It goes into the community itself. Every punishment becomes personal. Every punishment becomes visible. And that changes everything about how it has to work. Because here's the catch nobody warns you about. If you punish someone too harshly, in a small community where everyone is connected to everyone else, you don't just punish the offender. You risk starting a feud. A brother wants revenge. A cousin takes sides. Suddenly, your act of justice has planted a seed of a much bigger, much longer war. One that could tear the entire community apart for generations. So the real question was never, how do we punish this person? It was, how do we punish this person without destroying ourselves in the process? That single problem shaped almost every early justice system on Earth. Let's go back to that stolen winter food supply. The obvious instinct is revenge. An eye for an eye. But early societies discovered something uncomfortable very quickly. Revenge doesn't end conflict. It multiplies it. If you kill the man who stole your grain, his family now believes they've been wronged. And now they owe you something back. This is called a blood feud, and it can run for decades, sometimes centuries, with nobody even remembering how it started. So instead, many ancient societies did something surprising, something almost accountant-like, in the middle of what feels like it should be pure emotion. They put a price on harm. In early Germanic and Norse law, this was called wergild, literally, man price. If you killed someone, you didn't necessarily die for it. You paid. And the payment wasn't random. It was calculated with startling precision. A nobleman's life was worth more than a commoner's. Losing a hand had a price. Losing an eye had a price. Even insults had a price. This sounds cold, almost transactional for something as serious as death. But think about what it actually solved. It took an explosive, emotional, potentially endless cycle of revenge and turned it into a debt. Debts can be paid. Debts can be closed. And once closed, both families were expected, sometimes legally bound, to let it go. It wasn't about mercy. It was about survival. A community that allowed endless blood feuds would eventually destroy itself from the inside. But this raises an uncomfortable new question. What happens when someone can't pay? Not everyone had cattle, grain, or silver to hand over. So what happened to the poor? This is where punishment starts to look far more physical and far more public. In many early societies, if you couldn't pay your debt to society, your body became the payment instead. Flogging, branding, mutilation, cutting off the hand of a thief, for example, so that everyone who saw that hand for the rest of that person's life would know exactly what they'd done. This feels brutal to modern eyes. And it was. But notice what it's actually doing. It's not really about the wound itself, it's about visibility. In a world without newspapers, without criminal records, without ID cards, how do you warn a community about someone who can't be trusted? You mark them. Permanently. Their body becomes the record. Their body becomes the warning. This is the moment the story shifts from how do we settle a debt to something much stranger. Because once punishment becomes about being seen, something new becomes possible. Public punishment? Picture the town square. Stocks. A pillory. A person locked by the neck and wrists, standing in full view of everyone walking past. Why would a society choose this over simply locking someone away? Because the entire village was the justice system. There were no courts meeting behind closed doors, no juries sequestered from public view. Punishment had to happen in front of people because the people themselves were the ones enforcing the social contract. Public humiliation served a purpose we tend to overlook. It wasn't just punishing the offender, it was teaching everyone else, in real time, exactly where the line was. Think about it from a psychological angle. A prison hides consequence. You commit a crime, you disappear, and life goes on for everyone else without a visible reminder. But public punishment does the opposite. It burns the lesson into the collective memory of an entire community. And here's the twist most people never expect. Sometimes, this public shame was actually more feared than physical pain. In many small, tightly knit societies, from villages in medieval Europe to indigenous communities across the world, reputation wasn't just important, it was everything. Your ability to trade, to marry, to be trusted, to survive during a bad harvest when you needed your neighbor's help, all of it depended on your standing in the community. Lose that, and even if your body was untouched, you were, in a very real sense, ruined. Which leads to an even more extreme version of this same idea. What do you do with someone truly dangerous? Someone the community can't trust to walk among them, but who they also don't want to kill? The answer many societies landed on is almost the exact opposite of a prison. Instead of locking someone in, they threw them out. Banishment. Exile. Being cast out of the only world you'd ever known. This sounds, on the surface, like a lighter punishment than death. No blood, no scars, just leave. But in the ancient and medieval world, exile was often a death sentence with extra steps. Outside the walls of your village, outside your tribe, outside the network of people who fed you, sheltered you, and protected you from wild animals, disease, and rival groups. You were nothing. No status. No name that meant anything. No safety. The ancient Greeks had a specific, almost eerie term for a person who existed completely outside any community's protection. Outlaw, in some traditions, literally meant someone who existed outside the law's protection entirely, which meant anyone could harm them and no one would be punished for it. Let that sink in for a moment. In some legal traditions, an exiled person wasn't just unprotected, they were, in a legal sense, already treated as if they no longer existed. Killing them carried no consequence because the law no longer recognized them as someone who could be wronged. This is the moment the mystery deepens even further. Because now we have to ask, if belonging to a community was the very thing that made you human in the eyes of the law, what does that tell us about what punishment actually was for most of history? It wasn't about locking a body away. It was about removing a person's place in the web of human relationships that kept them alive. Here's where the story gets even more surprising, because we haven't even talked about who decided any of this. There was no judge in a black robe. No jury pulled from a random list of citizens. In many early societies, justice was handled through public assemblies, entire communities gathering to hear a case and decide. Together, what should happen? In early Germanic tribes, this gathering was called a thing, an assembly where free men would meet, argue, and collectively determine guilt and punishment. In Iceland, the Althing, one of the oldest continuously running parliamentary institutions in the world, functioned this way for centuries, resolving disputes without any prison system at all. Picture that for a moment. Justice wasn't handed down from above. It was built from the ground up, argued out loud, in public, by the very people who would have to keep living next to whoever was being judged. This changes the entire emotional texture of punishment. It's not the cold machinery of a distant legal system, it's your neighbors, your family, your entire social world, deciding your fate together, and then having to look you in the eye afterward. That's an enormous amount of social pressure, and it explains something modern systems often struggle to replicate: accountability that people actually felt, because it came from people they had to keep living with. But even this raises another problem. What happens when the crime is so severe that none of this, debts, marks, public shame, even exile, feels like enough? For the most serious crimes, murder, betrayal of the tribe, crimes seen as spiritually or socially catastrophic, many societies turn to the most permanent solution available: death. But even here, the how reveals something fascinating about why. Executions were almost never private. They were public events, sometimes drawing entire towns. This wasn't cruelty for cruelty's sake, or at least not only that. It was, again, about the community witnessing justice being served, together as one body. In some cultures, the method of execution was tied directly to the crime itself. A person who broke a sacred oath might be killed in a manner connected to that oath. A traitor might be executed in a way that symbolically undid their betrayal. Punishment wasn't just about ending a life. It was a form of storytelling, a final public statement about what the community valued and would not tolerate. This is where we start to see the shape of something much bigger than crime and punishment. We start to see the shape of identity itself. Step back for a second and look at everything we've uncovered. Debts instead of vengeance, marks instead of records, public shame instead of hidden cells, exile instead of walls, community judgment instead of distant courts. None of these systems were about correcting a person the way we sometimes claim modern prisons aim to do. They weren't about rehabilitation in the way we use that word today. They were about something more fundamental: keeping the group alive. Every one of these punishments, in its own way, answered the same underlying question. Not, how do we punish this individual, but how do we protect the fragile, interdependent web of relationships that our entire survival depends on? Because that's what early human life actually was: a tightly woven net of mutual obligation. You needed your neighbors during a famine. You needed your tribe during a raid. You needed your community's trust to trade, to marry, to simply be fed when your own harvest failed. Crime wasn't just a broken rule, it was a tear in that net. And punishment, however brutal, however strange it looks to us now, was society's attempt to mend that tear before it unraveled everything. This is also why prisons, when they eventually did appear, represent such a massive shift in human thinking. A prison assumes something these older systems never assumed: that a person can be removed from the community entirely, held in isolation, and processed by a system rather than by the people they actually harmed. In a strange way, the invention of the prison didn't just change how we punish, it changed who punishment belongs to. It took justice out of the hands of the community and placed it into the hands of an institution. And that trade-off, efficiency and detachment in exchange for that older, rawer communal accountability, is a trade we're still trying to understand the full cost of, even today. Here's the part that should stay with you. For most of human history, we didn't need buildings to hold justice. We needed relationships, reputation, belonging, the simple, powerful fact that other people knew who you were and depended on you being trustworthy. Take that away, through exile, through public shame, through being marked as untrustworthy, and you didn't need bars. The absence of belonging was the cage, which makes you wonder about our modern world. We've built systems that lock bodies behind walls. But in doing so, did we lose something those older societies understood instinctively? That real accountability doesn't come from a locked door. It comes from being known, from existing inside a web of people who would notice and respond if you broke the trust holding it all together. Maybe the real question was never, how did they punish people without prisons? Maybe it's this: in a world built entirely on trust, belonging, and being known by everyone around you, was there ever really a punishment worse than being forgotten?